The sun dipped below the horizon. Shadows stretched long and hungry across Havenwood. A peaceful night descended, like every night before. The air was still, holding its breath. Havenwood, a town untouched by time, slept. Its inhabitants, simple folk with simple lives, dreamt. They didn't know this peace was a facade, a thin veil soon to be torn. Havenwood was safe, or so they thought. They were about to learn that nowhere is safe when the sky bleeds. Sarah, a young woman with eyes as blue as the summer sky, walked home. A chill ran down her spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. She stopped, looking back at the darkening woods. The trees seemed to watch her, their branches like skeletal fingers. The wind whispered through the leaves, a language she couldn't understand. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. The sky was turning a deep crimson, the color of blood. The sight filled her with a primal fear she couldn't explain. The town gathered for the annual summer picnic. Laughter filled the air, the scent of barbecue tantalizing their nostrils. Children ran, their joyous screams echoing through the square. Then it happened. The sky, once a canvas of twilight blue, erupted in a fiery red. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Fear, raw and primal, gripped their hearts. The laughter died. The music stopped. The children's joyous screams turned into terrified whimpers. The night the sky bled, Havenwood's innocence died with it. Chaos erupted. People ran, their faces contorted in fear, their screams swallowed by the growing darkness. The crimson light pulsed, casting grotesque shadows that danced menacingly. The once familiar streets became a labyrinth of terror. The townsfolk, their faces illuminated by the blood-red sky, looked like creatures from a nightmare. The air crackled with an unknown energy. The wind howled, no longer a gentle breeze, but a vengeful spirit. The night the sky bled, Havenwood descended into chaos. Sarah, her breath catching in her throat, ran towards the church. Its steeple, a beacon of hope in the crimson-drenched night, promised sanctuary. Others followed, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. Inside, the air was thick with fear and the scent of incense. The stained-glass windows, usually vibrant with color, now glowed with an eerie, blood-red light. They huddled together, seeking solace in numbers, praying for a dawn that seemed a lifetime away. But the night was young and the horrors had just begun. Section 6. The Old Man's Tale. Old Man Hemlock, his eyes filled with a lifetime of forgotten horrors, stood by the altar. His presence alone seemed to cast a shadow over the room, a palpable sense of dread that made the air thick and heavy. His voice, raspy with age, cut through the silence. Each word he uttered seemed to carry the weight of centuries, echoing in the minds of those who dared to listen. He spoke of an ancient prophecy, of a night when the sky would bleed and shadows would rise. The imagery he painted was vivid and terrifying, a world where the natural order was upended and chaos reigned supreme. He spoke of creatures of darkness, their eyes burning with malevolent glee, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. These were not mere figments of imagination, but entities that thrived on fear and despair. Their touch, he warned, was a promise of madness and death. A single brush against their cold, clammy skin could drive a person to the brink of insanity, leaving them a hollow shell of their former self. His words, laced with fear and resignation, painted a chilling picture. The old man seemed to be reliving the horrors as he spoke, his voice trembling with the weight of his memories. The townsfolk listened, their blood turning to ice. Each revelation was like a dagger to their hearts, piercing through their facade of normalcy and exposing the raw terror beneath. The prophecy was no longer a myth, a bedtime story to frighten children. It was a grim reality that loomed over them, a dark cloud that threatened to engulf their lives. It was their reality, a nightmare unfolding before their eyes. The old man's tale was a harbinger of doom, a warning that the end was near, and there was no escaping the darkness that awaited them. Section 7. Facing the Unknown. The church doors creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted against the blood-red sky. Its eyes, two burning embers, pierced the darkness, sending shivers down their spines. Fear, raw and consuming, gripped their hearts. They were trapped with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The night the sky bled, they were forced to confront the unknown. The figure moved, its steps soundless, its presence radiating an aura of dread. The townsfolk huddled closer, their prayers turning into desperate pleas. They were lambs awaiting the slaughter. Section 8. Revelation. The night was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant howls of the wind. The church stood as a lone sentinel against the encroaching darkness, its ancient walls whispering secrets of the past. The figure stepped into the light, casting long shadows that danced eerily on the cold stone floor. Each step echoed with a foreboding sense of dread, as if the very air was holding its breath. It was not a demon, not a creature of darkness, but a man. His eyes, wide with fear, darted around the room, searching for unseen threats lurking in the shadows. His face, contorted in a silent scream, was a mask of terror. Every line and wrinkle told a story of unimaginable horror, of things that should not be seen by mortal eyes. He stumbled, his hand outstretched, his voice a raspy whisper. "Help me," he croaked, his words barely audible over the pounding of his heart. "They're here! They're here!" he gasped, blood trickling down his chin. "They're coming!" His voice was filled with a desperation that chilled the very soul, a plea for salvation that seemed all but lost. Then he collapsed, his eyes staring vacantly at the blood-red sky. The life drained from his body, leaving behind a shell of a man who had seen too much. His words, filled with a terror that transcended human comprehension, echoed through the silent church. The walls seemed to absorb his fear, amplifying it until it became a tangible presence. The townsfolk stared, their faces pale, their hearts pounding against their ribs. Who was coming? What horrors awaited them in the darkness? The questions hung in the air, unanswered as the night grew ever darker. Section 9. A Crimson Dawn. The night stretched on, an eternity of fear and anticipation. The streets were empty, shrouded in an eerie fog that seemed to swallow all sound. Every creak and whisper of the wind felt like a harbinger of doom, making the townsfolk shiver in their homes. They waited, hearts pounding, for the first light of dawn, hoping it would bring an end to their nightmare. The crimson light pulsed, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed like living things. These shadows seemed to have a life of their own, twisting and contorting in ways that defied logic. The townsfolk watched in horror, unable to tear their eyes away from the macabre display. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart, revealing a world of nightmares beneath. The air crackled with an unknown energy, a palpable tension that threatened to shatter their sanity. Flickering lights added to the sense of unease, casting long, jittery shadows that seemed to mock their fear. The atmosphere was thick with dread, each breath a struggle against the oppressive weight of the unknown. It felt as though the very air was alive, charged with a malevolent force that sought to consume them. As dawn approached, the sky remained a horrifying red. The usual hues of morning were replaced by a blood-red canvas that stretched across the horizon. It was a sight that filled the townsfolk with a deep, primal fear. They had hoped for the light to bring relief, but instead it only deepened their sense of dread. The red sky was a grim reminder that their ordeal was far from over. The sun, usually a beacon of hope, rose like a bloody eye, casting a crimson pall over the terrified town. Its light, instead of bringing warmth and comfort, seemed to amplify the terror that gripped their hearts. The sun's ascent was slow and deliberate, as if it was savoring the fear it inspired. The townsfolk could only watch in helpless horror as the day began under this ominous sign. The night the sky bled, dawn brought no solace, only the chilling realization that the horror had just begun. The blood-red sky was a constant reminder of the terror that had unfolded, and the unknown horrors that awaited them. It was a dawn unlike any other, one that marked the beginning of a new, terrifying chapter in their lives. The townsfolk knew that they were not safe, that the worst was yet to come. The townsfolk, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty, huddled together in the church, their prayers echoing in the silence. The church, usually a place of solace, now felt like a refuge from an impending storm. Their whispered prayers were filled with desperation, each word a plea for mercy and protection. The air inside was thick with the scent of burning candles and the weight of their collective fear. The night the sky bled, they were left to face an uncertain future, haunted by the chilling events of the night and the dread of what lay ahead. The red sky loomed over them, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. They knew that the events of the night were just the beginning, and that they would need to find strength in each other to face whatever horrors awaited them. The future was uncertain, but their resolve was unbroken.